Welcome to this Laker lesson, part of our Research into Action series. I'm Vanessa Kiesler, an education consultant hired by the Grand Valley Charter School office to bring you these Research into Actions with today's focus on chronic absenteeism. It's a good topic as we come back to school for the school year. If you've been watching this series, any of the Research into Action, you know we always start with a few things about research. There are three things to remember. One, research varies in quality. There's good research, there's not so good research, but as a practitioner, it's probably hard for you to know the difference or even probably care that much. You just want to know what works, what doesn't, you don't have the time for that. So that's what this series is designed to do, is to bring you the best research in an easy format so you don't have to go figure it out on your own. Another thing to remember is a lot of research shows associations, but it doesn't show cause and effect. And that's okay, because sometimes we just need to know how two things relate to each other, what's the likelihood of something. But when you hear words like this causes or this is effective, you want to be sure that the methods that were used are appropriate for determining those types of causal effects. And again, that's what this series does. So if I say something has been shown to be effective or use that language, it means that the research I'm citing had the appropriate methodology and peer review so that that's an accurate claim. And the final thing is, research is science, so it's always evolving. So sometimes I might come and talk about something on here, or we might talk about something elsewhere in the education community. And as the research continues, more evidence emerges, and sometimes we have to update our understanding of a topic. So keep tuning in because there's always more to learn. And as a reminder, there's good research that's available to you. The Grand Valley Charter School office does its own research, and it's available at gvsu.edu/CSO/research. So what are you going to learn today? You're going to learn first, what do we know about chronic absenteeism? Causes, effects, and prevalence. How common is it? And you're probably thinking, I think I already know the answer to this, and I bet you do, but let's see. And then the second thing you'll learn is, what does the research say about ways to help reduce chronic absenteeism? Today's presentation relies really heavily on two excellent resources. One is called Reducing Student Absenteeism, and it's a research brief out of the Ed Research for Action initiative at the Annenberg Institute and Results for America. And the second, a little closer to home, the Detroit Education Research Partnership at Wayne State University did a study on why Detroit students miss school and had some findings that were really important beyond Detroit, and those are referenced here as well. And these are linked at the end of the presentation if you want to read them yourself. Let's jump in. What is chronic absenteeism? Chronic absenteeism, and you're probably familiar with this definition, but if not, it's when students miss more than 10% of the school days. So in a 180-day school year, if they're missing more than 18 days. In general, the national research looks at between 5 and 20 days a year because school years and the number of days differ by state. This has been an issue for a while, even before the pandemic. The national study that I'm referencing here is from 2015-16, so before the pandemic. And at that point, nationwide, 16% of students in the nation were chronically absent. That's about 7 million children. And that range went from 5% up to 25% or sometimes higher. This is, Ed Research often confirms what we probably know intuitively, and unsurprisingly, rates of chronic absenteeism were highest among low-income students and students with disabilities and Black students. And I say unsurprisingly because there's a lot of factors that contribute to absenteeism, and that's what we're going to unpack in future slides, that are beyond individual student control. And then high school students are more likely to be chronically absent. As the current parent of a just graduated high schooler and a freshman, I can attest to this. So I'm sure if you have high schoolers in your life, you can as well. So I was reflecting on, okay, these numbers are from 15-16, and also I wonder what the rates are in Michigan, and I wonder what they are post-pandemic. So on My School Data, there is a report that is an attendance report, chronic absenteeism report. You can easily look up statewide numbers, your district, your school, your ISD. And what I found in 21-22 was pretty sobering. 38.5% of Michigan students were chronically absent. And obviously in 21-22, there's still some impacts from the pandemic. There's still probably illness, but that number is very high. It's closer to half of our students than not. And in fact, 50% of our economically disadvantaged students were chronically absent compared to 25% of non-economically disadvantaged students. African American, Hispanic, and American Indian students all had higher than average rates of chronic absenteeism. So again, they were even higher than that 38.5. 48% of students with disabilities were chronically absent. In Michigan, in this year, there weren't clear patterns by grade or English learner status. Everything hovered kind of close to 38.5. But again, 38.5 as an average is really high. And even if some of that chronic absenteeism is related to continued health concerns and pieces related to the pandemic, there's still that delta between 25% as the highest level in 15-16 to 38.5 as an average now. I mean, that's a huge jump. And so it's really important for all of education to think about, what do we know about why kids aren't getting to school and how do we get them back? Because school is a critical place not only for learning, but for that social development, for them to receive wraparound services. So many reasons kids need to be in school. And I know you, as a practicing educator, you know that. Okay, so I mentioned this already, and this comes from the work out of the Detroit Education Research Partnership. Absenteeism is not just about a kid and whether they go to school or not. It's also about their family, their support network, their community, their peers. It's about their schools and their neighborhoods. And then that's all wrapped in policies, systems, and structures. So something I think about a lot when I record these research into actions for all of you, your school leader, your teacher maybe, you're working every day, you're working really hard every day. And I think it can be disheartening to think, oh, this woman's going to tell me what I already know. I know half my kids who need to be here are gone every day. I don't need more information on the problem. I need more information on possible solutions. And I just want to name that today's presentation will talk about solutions at different levels, but that this is a challenge that needs to be addressed with policy, needs to be addressed by the school and the district. Families and communities have to get involved, and then the student as well. So it's a multifaceted ecological problem, to use the words from the Detroit Education Research Partnership, and there's a lot of factors that interact. Everything on this slide is from the research brief, and again is backed by other research studies that looked into this specifically. But some of the key causes of chronic absenteeism, which again may not surprise you, transportation comes in at one of the biggest. If it's hard to get to school, you don't get to school. And then related to transportation, but a version of it is danger on the way to school. No safe way to walk, bus stops that are unsafe, things like that. Asthma, kids with asthma, so schools that have higher rates of kids with asthma have higher rates of chronic absenteeism. Colder weather, again, we live in Michigan, so we get that. That can be an impediment. And then schools with poor ventilation. And this is something that has been, I think, brought to light a lot during the pandemic, so maybe that's improving already. But all of these factors have been shown to impact absenteeism rates. On the more interpersonal level, conflicts with teachers. When kids are in conflict, when they feel like a teacher doesn't like them or there's a continuous problem, and or other students. If kids don't feel like they want to be at school, like there are people there for them, that's going to make it a lot harder for them to go. And then again, as we already talked about, this is an ecological problem. So factors that are outside of the school, like neighborhood poverty and neighborhood violent crime, do contribute to chronic absenteeism. Digging a little bit deeper, kindergarten absenteeism is most frequently associated with those kind of family-specific factors, like an ill parent or complicated work schedules or unstable housing. While high school absenteeism is more frequently associated with those student and school factors. So bullying, boredom, I don't like schoolwork, lack of interest. Again, those issues with school, with teachers, feeling like the school is not a great place for them. And then a negative self-perception, both academic and social. This is my own opinion. This is not a research statement. This is an opinion. But this third bullet, personal stress, depression, anxiety, has to be a huge contributor to that rise in chronic absenteeism over the last few years. Even if the pandemic is not considered officially a pandemic anymore, the impacts on our students, on all of us, but I think especially on young people, are really far-reaching. And it was a very anxious and stressful time that went on for a long time. And I think that is still contributing. A lot of people, not just me, a lot of people think that, but we know that when kids have personal stress, depression, and anxiety, they are more likely to stay home from school. And we also know now more kids have stress, depression, and anxiety. So you can see why chronic absenteeism has been on the rise. And then absenteeism peaks at key points in the education system, like in kindergarten or first grade, when you're first starting to go to school, when you transition to middle school, when you transition to high school. And again, this did not surprise me as the parent of a recent graduate. Senior year, peak in chronic absenteeism, senior year. What are some of the effects? Again, this is going to be kind of a no duh, we know, but obviously absenteeism has negative effects on outcomes, but those effects are more serious for low performing students, kids who most need to be in school to get the instruction, to get the extra support, for low income students, and for English learners. And then there's also this interesting but unfortunate thing that comes up in research where classmates who are not chronically absent but are in the same schools as a number of kids who are chronically absent, and so these kids are in schools with kids who are chronically absent, but they themselves are not. But if those kids are low performing, low income, and or English learners, they also have diminished outcomes, even though they are in school. So there's this negative spillover of a number of kids being absent. And again, from a practical standpoint, it's easy to see why. Teachers can't teach, they have to go reteach. It reduces the ability to move forward on multi-day projects, all the things that come with not being in school. But research definitely bears it out that chronic absenteeism has an impact even on the non-chronically absent. And then research shows that missing large amounts of school in the early grades has impacts on future achievement, attendance, and social emotional development. So we've painted a pretty dire picture of why, how bad this is, and what's going on. So is there any hope? What does research say about what can be done to reduce chronic absenteeism? There are a number of practices that really are about supporting all students, and then there are some practices that are more targeted to those who are chronically absent. And the first bullet is across all the research, this is really the biggest one. So transportation, including general access to transportation, as well as some more targeted transportation for those students most in need. So a tip, if you do an analysis of your attendance data, and later on we're going to talk about which data you can look at, you can understand more about which kids are more likely to be absent and try to understand maybe why and how much transportation plays into it. There are some innovations in the research that haven't been fully evaluated, but that are coming up and are under study right now. Door-to-door van services, ride-sharing services, family carpool coordination. So there are some promising practices that don't rise to the level of we know they're effective, but districts are starting to use them to try to solve this transportation issue. Again, related to the dangerous routes to school, it's effective to monitor common walking routes and trying to coordinate walk to school routes. So I'll just name, while transportation has a much more explicit price tag to it, walking routes, helping kids find out who to walk with, there's a cost, but it's different than, putting 5 buses on the road or something. So if in a budget strapped thing, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, think about which parts of the transportation problem you can get at, because any of those efforts will likely have an impact on your absenteeism. I know this is a common practice just in education, but when looking at it in terms of its ability to reduce absenteeism, having those morning routines to greet students as they arrive at school has been shown to help reduce absenteeism. So again, if kids feel welcome, they feel like they know what's going to happen, they are more likely to come to school. And then offering school breakfast, other support services, to help parents to lower that burden or challenge of the getting to school. So we need clean clothes, we need a ride, and we need to feed the kids breakfast, and we need these pieces. When you can offer food at school, you can offer some laundry services, and you can offer some of those things in that whole child support framework, that does help with absenteeism. Other things that have been shown to help reduce chronic absenteeism, improving school infrastructure, so better ventilation, asbestos removal. And there's been investments in this in the last few years from the federal and the state level. So while they're important for health in general, again, they should have a positive impact on absentee rates. And then in-school health services, as well as those hybrid models for providing health services, have been shown to be effective in improving attendance. This third one really resonates with me in the sense of, kids want to be at school. So research has shown that when you have a school schedule that promotes student and staff health, so that includes things like time for movement, attention to mental health and acknowledgement of it and supports for it, safe spaces and time for artistic expression, that helps with attendance. It gives kids something that they want to come to school for. It helps make sure that while they're there, they can stay healthy mentally, physically. I've heard many times in the last, I've been in education for 20 years now, and I've heard many times like, oh, we just can't do any of that anymore. We have to spend more time on English. We have to spend more time on math. But the research is saying that's not true. Like, you need to invest time in the things that make kids want to come to school, that help them stay safe and healthy when they're there, or else they're not there for the extra English, the extra math, and they're not capable or ready to learn. So be encouraged, if you're a school that's really investing in these sorts of things for your kids, be encouraged that you're on the right research-based path. Home visits by teachers or other school staff helps, going out to visit the home, see what's happening. This is, again, a probably more targeted strategy. I don't think it's realistic to visit every single house all the time. But when you have a group of kids who are absent and you think maybe some additional understanding of the structure at home and the needs, home visits are supported by research. And then regular attendance reports and two-way communication where parents can also say, hey, here's my problem. I don't have a ride, or I'm not sure what time it starts, or whatever. Those have some good impacts in the research, but punitive messaging, negative communication, like you better get your kid to school, or they're so bad, or here's all the consequences, even though that's a place where schools tend to go, actually the research suggests that's not a good practice. Punitive messaging, more negative consequence-based messaging, that will have the opposite effect, or either no effect or a negative effect. So be cautious about the messaging. And also, I think, having received a few messages that I'm sure somebody thought was positive, parents can understand a positive message that's really a negative message, like, do a better job. Everybody work together to improve attendance. We mean you. You get the point. Really being careful about how that messaging comes across is a research-based best practice. And then I wanted to highlight this as just such a key point from the research for absenteeism, but also other research we've done and highlighted here. The importance of students being engaged in their learning. So when students are engaged, they are then more likely to attend school. And that happens when they feel connected to school, when the schoolwork connects with their identity, when they're engaged, when they're challenged, and when they feel a sense of belonging. So all the work you do around engaging curriculum, engaging, exciting pedagogy, and a school community that really meets kids where they are, that is not only good for reducing chronic absenteeism, but it's good for a whole host of other things. So again, those efforts, keep with them. And finally, there are a couple other things. Again, these are more programmatic, mentorship programs and pairing students with role models. And some national examples are Check and Connect, My Brother's Keeper, City Year, Peer Group Connection. But regardless of what the program is, when you identify students with data and you pair them with mentors over a sustained period of time, that has good impacts on attendance. And again, other research shows other outcomes it's positive for as well. And then youth school engagement programs. So programs based at the school that help kids stay engaged. So some more intensive strategies really get to this idea, going back to that ecological model, that schools do not exist in a vacuum, and this challenge exists within communities, within policies, within structures. And so when schools can partner with other public agencies and other community-based organizations, that is effective. And I note here that the Michigan Department of Education supports and helps districts work toward the whole school, whole community, whole child model. And that model is the same idea, that academics is part of the whole child and that you need to take care of the whole child in order to have good holistic outcomes. And part of that taking care of the whole child is partnering outside of education. Again, this isn't easy necessarily, but bringing other agencies in, bringing other community-based organizations in to help is a research-based strategy. A few practices to avoid, and I already mentioned one, but attendance awards. Interestingly enough, the research shows that they either don't work or kids increase their attendance to get the award and then decrease their attendance right away because they're like, well, I got the award, or they feel like they don't need to do it anymore. So it has this like odd negative consequence that probably is not what you're looking for. And then punitive discipline strategies. And I know the education community in general is wrestling with the best ways to have accountability and consequences for kids. What does discipline really look like? But in this discussion only, when discipline is very punitive, or when kids who have poor attendance are assigned to teachers who have really punitive classroom practices, really restrictive and punitive classroom practices, all of that decreases attendance and thus increases chronic absenteeism. So in the work you're doing around your discipline practices, looking at them through maybe a restorative justice lens or just other practices that really help remediate the behavior and hold the child accountable, but also get them engaged and supported in the school community, know that it has an attendance basis as well. And then I know I just told you to partner with external organizations, but the research says that when there's strategies that rely on too many external organizations or too much of this work is outsourced, then the school loses the ability to make it meaningful, to connect it with curriculum, pedagogy, other initiatives. And so being judicious in your choice of external organization, your choice of partners. There are some tools that I know the Michigan Department of Education offers through the Michigan Integrated Continuous Improvement Process for you to do an evaluation of possible strategies or programs for fit with your school or your district. And I'd encourage you to think about using that or another tool before you just get 12 partnerships and be like, okay, problem solved. It will do some good, but now you have 12 partnerships, maybe not all working toward the same goal. So I had to do a little sidebar here on data. You know, I love to talk about data. And I feel like there's a thing we do in education where we say things like, well, we need the data, or like use a data system or build a data system. All that language is too generic. So the research does support the use of, quote, data systems that identify students for increased support based on attendance, behavior, and academic metrics. So sometimes I think people read a recommendation like this and they're like, we should make a data system. No, you should not make a data system. You should use one of the data systems that are already available to you. So in Michigan, you would have 3 main sources of data, possibly more. I didn't put some of the ISD work or whatever, but here are 3 through the state. There is data in the MyMTSS that supports multi-tiered systems of support. It's a long URL, but it's the Michigan Department of Education offers this data service. So this data helps you identify students who are in need of academic and other supports. This is exactly the type of data you need to find those students who have attendance issues. If you're like, MyMTSS isn't my game, I don't want to do that, you have MyKIP, the Michigan Integrated Continuous Improvement Process. It is built around the whole child. It integrates data. You can look at your attendance data right in there and you can tie it to your school and district continuous improvement goals. So use that data. Or if you're like, I don't want to use either of those, or I'm not the person who has access to that, but I still want to look at things. I already mentioned this, the My School Data reports. There are the statewide reports, but there's also, if you go to the Parent Dashboard for School Transparency, I just took a couple screenshots so you can see. You can look up your school and you can easily toggle between all students and any of the subgroups you want to see, and you can see your school's attendance rate, on-track attendance rate, compared to the average of similar schools, compared to the state of Michigan. So poor East Lansing always gets used as my little example because that's where my kids are, but I pulled a few of their screenshots so you can see there on the left, it's all students, on the middle, it's economically disadvantaged, and on the right, it's students with disabilities. And so what I see is East Lansing in general has 73% on-track attendance at East Lansing High School. That is just a little bit above their comparison group, and it is better than the state average. In the middle panel, for their economically disadvantaged students, 60% are on on-track attendance. 57% of their comparison group is on track, and then 49% of the state. And then on the rightmost panel, 54% of their students with disabilities have on-track attendance. That's lower than their comparison group and close to the state average. So like I said, if this is easy, you can just look it up on your computer. You can look through all this at the school level, and you don't have to have special permissions or access or really even be a data person. So please use the data tools available to you. You know that I always like to wrap this up with a few practical next steps, and I've sprinkled a few throughout the presentation, but what to do next? I already spoiler alerted my first couple bullets. Take a look at your data, and again, the data that I talked about, or if you have data at your school that's not in one of these systems, you can look at that too, but really pinpoint your attendance issues. Is it a certain grade within your school? Are there any patterns by student demographics? Maybe it's patterns we can't see in the state data, but it's, these kids, kids who live from this certain neighborhood because the bus is always late, or kids in a certain friend group because friend group dynamics. Like, look at your data, both quantitative in the systems and also your own qualitative data, and figure out and prioritize your attendance issues. And then look at what you're already doing. I don't think there's a school out there that's doing nothing about low attendance. So what strategies are you already doing? Are there any that maybe you want to stop? And are there a couple that you might want to start? I know educators often feel pressure to implement all the best practices at once. So a presentation like this turns into a checklist, not a list of possible options. And that's not effective and also not supported by research. You can't do everything well all at the same time. So identify a couple strategies you could maybe implement this year, and then do try to come up with an easy to manage metric. Again, this is another thing education can do where we're like, well, what's the measure? And sometimes we get so into measuring that we forget about what we're even doing. What's the metric you're watching? So for example, if you decide that you're going to do a walk to school initiative, you're going to monitor the 3 most common walking route, get a couple teachers to volunteer to do that, and you're going to help put kids in groups. Maybe identify those kids that you're targeting for those groups and keep track of their attendance over the 3 months, 6 months, and see how it's going. Because maybe that's not really the problem, and then you can put those efforts someplace else. This wasn't in the research, but I always think that we miss the opportunity to talk to kids and to say, why aren't you coming to school? Like, what's the problem? And talking to parents when possible. What are the barriers? How can we help? It helps you learn a lot, and it also helps open that communication and create those trusting relationships. And then I would continue to press on this transportation issue. And I know you are likely from a charter school if you're watching this video, and I know transportation in charters is not the same as traditional districts, but charters can offer transportation. Some of you, I'm sure, already do. Others of your partners or friends around the state are doing it. So if you were to prioritize an investment into raising your attendance, transportation is a good thing to prioritize. So you maybe look at some of those innovations we talked about, be creative, look at partnerships. Anything you do here to help kids be able to get to school is actually the best investment into reducing attendance based on the research. And then again, remember, if kids want to be in school, they're more likely to be there. You know this as educators, but I want to encourage you to keep focusing on engaging learning, thinking about the cultural relevancy of the learning, the quality of the learning, the pedagogy, the curriculum, and the learning environment in general, so that kids think about school as a place they want to be and not as a place they have to be. I mentioned these 2 resources already, but here's the citations. And thank you for joining us for this Laker lesson.